Hi, I'm Helen Shaw. I'm the Deputy Director of Development and Alumni at Birkbeck, and I'm joined today by Geraldine Sundstrom, who is the Managing Director and Portfolio Manager at PIMCO. Thank you so much, Geraldine, for taking the time to do this with us today.
Helen.
So I'll open with, tell us about you and the work that you do.
Well, I'm first of all a mother of two teenage boys. I studied at Birkbeck and graduated for the Master in Finance back in 1998. I did it part-time while working over 2 years. And currently, I'm a portfolio manager managing multi-assets at PIMCO.
Fantastic. And how did you come to work in finance?
Well, somewhat of an ironic path. When I was at school, I majored in math and physics. And when I applied for engineer school, I was told I would be the only girl out of a class of 50 plus people, and I literally panicked. So I made a 180-degree turn and decided to study politics, which didn't quite match my character. But politics made me discover economics. So for second year, I went into economics, which made me discover finance. And then in postgraduate, I studied finance. The irony of it all is that my first job was in finance, and I spent most of my career being surrounded by men.
Including now with two teenage sons.
Indeed.
Fantastic. So working in finance is an incredibly interesting career. What particularly makes you really proud of what you do?
Well, today, with the pandemic and seeing the amazing job that nurses and doctors do, maybe what I'm doing is not that important after all. But genuinely, I'm being trusted with savings of people, with their retirement. And of course, this money is extremely precious. So I have to take care of it really like it were my own and constantly learning. We are in a world that evolves, and I've been in this career for over 20 years, but each cycle only rhymes, doesn't repeat. So to give the best for these people and taking the best of their money is just to constantly readjust, learn, and adjust. And I suppose, the results of it all and what hopefully I've managed to achieve so far is something that makes me proud.
It's such a kind of fantastic philosophy. And you mentioned kind of, it rhymes, it doesn't repeat. And that is such an interesting way to look at it. I have to say, it sounds like you are hugely invested in your career. And I must ask, you said at the beginning that, you're a mother. How did you kind of juggle such a kind of really important career alongside your family?
Well, I suppose it's a bit of a scar of Birkbeck. Of course, Birkbeck was super important. I learned crucial things for my career. I met great people from lots of countries and backgrounds. Some of them were still dear friends of mine. But I think, and I've been always sometimes discussing with some of your colleagues, I still have nightmares about it, that I show up at an exam and I missed all the class because of work. But I think there's a lesson in all of this, is that when I started, I know you guys who are still studying or finding it super hard. I almost gave up halfway my studies at Birkbeck, but decided to sort of stick around for the second year. When you will start working without Birkbeck in the background, work will feel like the Club Med. And I would say that literally, once you've done this in your life, you'll be able to juggle the kids, the household, the job, and still perform. I don't mean to say it's easy, but I suppose the hard years of Birkbeck gave me the strength, the organization, and the power to push this through.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I'm pretty sure a lot of alumni would feel exactly the same. It certainly seems like kind of taking on so much while studying prepares you for a lot. So it's fantastic. One of the things that throughout your career, you've really been a powerful advocate for increasing visibility and empowerment of women in finance. Why is that so important to you?
Well, I'm a true believer that, balanced team bring richer and better outcome. And so, I'm just a little drop in the ocean, but I felt, I had a mission. And therefore, throughout, those 20 plus years, I have, taken women under my wing. I have mentored, I have nurtured, I have trained. And then, with great proudness, see some of them go and fly with their own wings. So this is something I have, done very consciously, helping many women around me with the hope that all these little drops eventually would, feed a river, and then, things can get bigger and greater. And I suppose many women in the industry have been doing the same that I have. And this is why when I started my career, I might have been the only woman in the room more often than not, but it is less and less the case nowadays.
Definitely. And I mean, what would be your advice to the next generation of women coming into finance?
Well, I think things are changing dramatically. What we've seen in the last 2 years and this embracement of diversity is fantastic news. But I would say this is just putting the foot in the door. Like, women are given opportunity, but I suppose, once you're given the opportunities, what do you do about it? And what I have discovered painfully sometimes through my career is that unless you ask for it, it rarely comes. I don't know if it was my education, my character, or maybe because I'm a woman, or a mix of all of this. I tend to think that if I work hard and I deserve it, it's going to come. And more often than not, you'll figure that it's not going to come unless you say it or you ask for it. So I'm not telling women out there to just be rebels. That's not the case. When you feel you've achieved something, you deserve it, and you're ready for the next step, ask for it. And I think you'll manage your career and your frustration way better by talking. I mean, we are usually very good at talking, but when it comes to self-promotion, we tend to be pretty useless at it. So, boost your ego a little bit sometimes and say it and ask for it.
That's fantastic advice. I mean, I know there's so many women out there who that's probably kind of that moment where they need to kind of sit back and go, yes. And exactly as you say, yes, I feel like I deserve this. And yes, I want to ask for that. How would you suggest women kind of prepare themselves for those conversations? And how would you suggest that they have the confidence to have that conversation?
Well, for me, and that might not be the best example, is that sometimes it's by overachieving a little bit. So when you feel you've gone, okay, I genuinely deserve it and I feel really confident about it, just go for it. If it's just about there, you will sort of flake. And be prepared. Don't hesitate to go in the room with, a few bullet points on a piece of paper. How many times I've been in a meeting with my boss and then it's like, I forgot to say this and this was super important. Prepare. Have your thought process, your bullet point, and really try to get it through. Of course, they'll try to interrupt you. They'll try, no, just be firm and earn respect this way.
It's fantastic. It's absolutely brilliant advice. And, we've kind of talked there about the work that you do around finance and managing essentially other people's money. It's clearly quite an uncertain time financially at the moment, given everything that's going on in the world. I'm thinking from a UK perspective, Brexit, as well as the pandemic. But what are your kind of personal forecasts for the post-pandemic outcome?
Well, I'm unusually optimistic. And I won't say this lightly, but it's the most positive and exciting time that I have encountered in my entire career. I don't know if it is thanks to or because of, or if the pandemic acted as a catalyst. But it seems that world leaders have finally embraced climate change. And there is a genuine tsunami of green. We see countries, one after another, pledge to net zero CO2 emissions. And right now, roughly speaking, there's over 60% of the world GDP that is going to recover from the pandemic and grow with the pledge of net zero. And so from, a human point of view, looking at my children and eventually, I hope, grandchildren, I look forward to this one day, we can look finally at a better future. I think that the efforts from what I see on a day-to-day basis are truly genuine. And from both, an investment, but also job outlook, I believe this will bring lots of opportunity for, the generations, the millennials, the Gen Z, and that makes me very hopeful. Never before I have seen such a large part of the world walking a walk that is a good one. Definitely.
And touching on kind of climate change and the economy kind of there, can you, for those of us who are not financially kind of adept, can you spell out for us kind of the link between kind of climate change and the financial economy and how those two go together for the future?
Of course. So we are essentially going to rebuild entire parts of the economy from scratch. Think about, electric vehicle and the full ecosystem that goes around it, renewable energy for utilities. And what we're going to see is enormous growth. I call it of biblical proportion. In the sense that currently electric vehicles are barely a few percent of world automobiles. Within a decade to 15 years, we're going to reach close to 100%. So this is like a 20x time growth. We're going to need 18 times more batteries to power those vehicles. And those vehicles consume 3 times as many semiconductors as traditional ones. And I can go on and on like this about solar energy, wind, storage of energy, and all the other side, maybe a bit more, which are nature-based solution of negative emission, carbon sequestration, and also carbon capture, and all these things. And of course, to do all of this, you need a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of financing that needs to go and help those, startup, those that are innovating, that companies, that utilities that will rebuild their generation of electricity, the grid, and so on. So it's going to be absolutely huge. I can see things that are going to carry on, for the next 30 years. I mean, most of the plan are out to 2050, 2060. So for most of the students that are looking at this, I mean, your entire career is going to be defined by this, I believe, looking forward, because by then you will reach retirement age. And this is what I tell my 2 sons. Look at this really carefully. Choose where you want to be involved. The good news is that at the moment, I think there's plenty of willingness from world leaders, from central banks, from investors like myself, who are going to fund this green recovery. And that's why I'm, genuinely enthusiastic about the future once we can finally turn the sad page of the pandemic.
Definitely. It's fascinating. And, you speak so passionately about kind of climate change and about kind of the green recovery. Do you think that this is really, to be quite grandiose about it, but one of the biggest challenges facing the next generation?
Absolutely. I think, so currently I'm just doing some bean counting, right? I'm looking at, how many solar panels do we need and how many batteries and how much lithium to power all of this. Looking at how we're going to reach all these pledges. And currently there's not enough. There's genuine shortage. And I was talking to some economist colleagues, and we were, and maybe there are some students here who are studying it. Usually you see shortages happen very late in the cycle. Here we've just barely started. 2020 in many ways was the year of planning. How are we going to get about this net zero world, 30 years out? We haven't even started to genuinely invest. And in the fourth quarter of this year, right in the middle of a pandemic, there are shortages of everything. There's not enough to power this green recovery. And we're going to have to, all these countries and all these companies, sort of work hard to make sure that we get enough so that in the end, we will save the planet and our future.
It's so interesting because I hadn't necessarily thought of it in that sense. So it's really interesting to hear that this is kind of also this supply chain, it's the economics piece, there's so much wrapped into this. It really is such a complex problem. And it's not historically something that I would have associated finance to be kind of helping solve. So it's really interesting when you talk about yourself as an investor kind of being part of this green recovery, whereas historically, I think sometimes there is a view that finance has perhaps fueled the other way. What are your thoughts on that?
It's true. I think, financial crisis and maybe bad management by, certain people has put a bad rap around it all. But I think there are investors like myself and the whole category of investing that we call, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, but also impact finance. So there are many ways to be, a bit of an activist. I mean, beyond what you do in your day-to-day life. Again, the analogy of little drops of water is something that I do in my daily life. But then as an investor, there are ways to positively reward companies that are doing great effort. There are ways to discriminate between companies that are not transitioning to their target, while others that are doing great things. So what I've done in my fund is to really focus on this and try to build the portfolios with companies that are genuinely, providing, enabling this green recovery. It makes sense from a ethical, holistic approach, but what we find out as well is it also makes a lot of sense to actually, make money out of it, and for our clients, and generate the performance that these people need to have good retirement, or achieve their dreams with their savings.
It's fantastic, and actually very positive to hear that ethical and kind of the actual income generation side can sit side by side. So that's really fantastic. And you mentioned kind of, some of our students at Birkbeck will be kind of studying this. And I know that there are so many students at Birkbeck at the moment. We do have a master's in climate change and cities, and so many people will be we've seen a huge uptake in some of those courses now because it is so pressing. I mean, when you studied at Birkbeck, you did your MSc in finance, and you've kind of touched on a couple of the things that you took away in terms of juggling life, study, work. What were the kind of main things outside of that you took away from your Birkbeck degree?
Well, there were things that I learned, but I that might be slightly. I think for students, it's more important to have a brain that is well structured and made than completely full with things. We all figure out that what we actually use in our day-to-day work compared to what we've learned, is not necessarily super lined up. So I think Birkbeck, by, having this, first of all, very diverse and inclusive way of bringing people from, I had never been at school with people from all over the world. I had studied before in France with French people and not much else. So amazing opening, hearing about stories, about perspective, and then, you know, great teachers. I think I thank all this teacher for, you know, ruining all the evenings, not being with their family to teach us and give us an amazing act of generosity. And even though it was super hard, we were very sort of, it was a team effort. I mean, there were many classes, sadly, I could not attend. And so we had to rely upon each other, help each other. So team building, embracing diversity. I think, and the hard work and getting organized and, you know, having deadline at work, while at the same time you have exams coming up. I famously never took any break for preparing for my exams, just put a bit of pressure on top. I think all of this are invaluable, way beyond the curriculum, which of course I'm not trying to diminish in any way, but it really forges the character and who you are.
I think, you know, as you said, there's the curriculum, which is obviously taught by incredible teachers. You learn some fantastic stuff, but I think, you know, there is this, you have the practical and the theoretical, but then actually coming in and applying that is totally different. And actually, as you say, it's that community at Birkbeck that differentiates Birkbeck as an institution. It's not just kind of what you learn, it's the people you learn alongside. It's the way in which you're learning to manage and structure your brain, as you'd kind of put it. I think that's fantastic. And you've always been a really passionate supporter of Birkbeck. Can I ask why you stay involved, why you give back to Birkbeck?
Well, I think education is the most important gift in life. It's the greatest door opener. We are all masters of our destiny, people like to tell us, but I think it's only true if you give people quality education. So I think for me, this is one way I can help others. I was lucky enough, you know, to be born in a place where I could access studies. I was lucky enough to do postgraduate, and not everybody can do it. So on this social ladder, if we call it this way, I suppose it's the greatest enabler. And I often say that Birkbeck, in this world of inclusion and diversity, was 300 years ahead of its time. The part-time study is amazing. I couldn't afford studying without a job. My family could not support me to that extent. And taking a loan was not something I was, you know, very keen on doing. So I think Birkbeck really brings all of this together. I know it's hard work. I'm not saying it's easy and, you know, it's a walk in the park, but Birkbeck is an incredible enabler. And by helping Birkbeck, I think we can help people who, you know, truly wanted and therefore, you know, badly deserve it, to elevate themselves, and then hopefully, you know, great parents, you know, can bring great children, and ultimately an educated world is a world with better outcome, is a fairer world.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through kind of an overview of you, what's currently front of mind, and your journey with Birkbeck. Really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And we'll speak to you soon.